Hello and welcome to today's lesson, the brain. Today we're going to be discussing the different parts of the nervous system, their respective functions, and how they develop over time. Let's get started. For this lesson, we're going to start big picture and then focus in on specific structures. With that being said, the most logical starting point is with the two primary components of the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord. The brain effectively serves as the central command station for the entire body and is responsible for processing information about the environment, planning actions, and issuing commands to the rest of the body. While the brain may be the central command station, its job would be pretty much impossible to do without the spinal cord. The spinal cord is what facilitates the communication between the brain and the rest of the body. The brain can actually be further divided into two halves, also known as hemispheres. The left and right hemispheres are connected by a bundle of nerves known as the corpus callosum. Although they're very similar in structure, the left and right hemispheres are responsible for different functions. As a matter of fact, the left hemisphere is known to be responsible for the formation of words, while the right hemisphere is believed to be better for processing spatial information.
So now that we've gotten an introduction to the brain and learned about other parts of the brain, now we're going to talk about more parts. Now let's look at these pictures right here. We see the Astros winning a title. We see you getting an A+. We see the final scene of Harry Potter. And we see another sports event. Now, what do these pictures do? Do they remind you of something? Do they make you feel something? Now, what you're probably feeling are different kinds of emotions based on how you perceive these things. And our emotions are dictated by our limbic system. And the limbic system is a set of structures that deals with our emotions, our motivations, and our pleasure. It's not just one thing that I can point out. It consists of many parts of the brain that are working together underneath the cerebral hemisphere to make you feel these kinds of different feelings. Parts of the brain like the thalamus, the cerebrum, the hypothalamus are all part of the limbic system. They all work together so you can feel emotions like happiness, like sadness, like anger, like motivation. Like whenever we think about our emotions, we always say, oh, it's controlled by our brain, but specifically it's controlled by the limbic system. And so going off of that, a specific part of the limbic system is the cerebrum. And the cerebrum consists of 85% of the brain's mass. It's by far the biggest part of the brain, and it's, I'd say, one of the most important. The cerebrum consists of four main lobes: the parietal lobe, the frontal lobe, the occipital lobe, and the temporal lobe. All these lobes do different functions, things like learning, reasoning, emotions, and moving our muscles. And specifically parts of the cerebrum are the cerebral cortex, which is the surface, and the bumps and the grooves, the uri and the sulci. The sulci specifically help increase the surface area of the brain and allow us to fit more cells so that the brain can have more functions and do more memory. And actually, if you actually went into a brain and did it, and you flattened out this entire cerebral cortex, it would be 2.5 square feet. Like, imagine that. Imagine all of that just tightly packed into your head. I find it fascinating. And so another part of the brain that we're going to talk about, which we're going to introduce you to, is the brainstem. And so let's look at these pictures. We have someone breathing, we have someone coughing, and we have a heartbeat. Now, have you ever really had to think about breathing? Have you ever really had to think about getting your heart to beat? Have you really ever had to think about sneezing? No, those are things you just know to do. Those are things your body just does without you having to actively tell it to, in a sense. And so how does that work? How does the body just know to breathe? How does the body just know to keep a heartbeat? And the way the body knows is through the brainstem. The brainstem connects directly with the spinal cord. And as we know, the central nervous system connects directly with the spinal cord. And so the brainstem works with the brain and the spinal cord to provide a connection between the two and coordinates our automatic functions. Automatic functions such as breathing, heartbeat, swallowing, coughing, things we just do without having to think. And it's a very interesting part of the brain because something that I find fascinating about the brainstem is if you tried holding your breath, which do not do, if you held your breath for as long as you could and you ended up passing out, your body knows to immediately start breathing again. And that's why you can't pass away from just holding your breath, because once you pass out, your brainstem will take over and force you to breathe. And so those are the parts of the brain that I'm going to talk about. And so next we're going to have Arya talk about more.
Directly behind the brainstem is the cerebellum. Try saying the word brainstem right now. Notice how you opened and closed your mouth, and you were also able to transform the idea of the word brainstem into actual words. You can thank your cerebellum for this. Even though the cerebellum only takes up 10% of your brain, it contains more than half of your brain's neurons because it controls many important everyday parts of your life. That's why it's often known as the little brain. In addition to speech, your cerebellum helps you maintain a balanced posture and coordinates movements. It's the reason you don't fall over when walking or when lifting weights. More importantly, your cerebellum can also help you learn new motor skills. Even though it might be difficult to ride a bike or a unicycle at first, your cerebellum can adapt to the skill and eventually help you balance yourself. As you can see in this diagram, the cerebellum is located at the back of the brainstem. So now you know that your brain has many cool structures and functions that are useful in your everyday life. But how does your brain grow and change over time? Researchers found that the brain actually grows the most during the first 5 years of life compared to any other year. When children are born, their brains are about 1/4 the size of the average adult brain. The size doubles by the first year, reaches 80% by the third year, and 90%, almost its full size, by the fifth year. In addition to the overall brain size, scientists have also found that different regions of the brain grow at different rates too. One of the last brain regions that we develop is the cerebral cortex. Fully developed at the age of 25, the cerebral cortex helps you with judgment, organization, and reasoning skills. You may notice that these skills improve as you get older, and maybe that's why people commonly assume that older people are more mature than younger people. But I know that all of us kids think otherwise. And as you can see in this diagram, the cerebral cortex is located on the outermost part of the brain. We now know that majority of our brain develops at a young age, but how can we tell the difference between each of our brains, especially if our brains have the same size? The answer is connections. With the high number of brain cells that we develop at a young age, it is the connections between these cells that make us different from one another. Brain connections help us move, think, communicate, and just about anything else. So, how are they formed? During early childhood, a young child can make more than 1 million new brain connections every second as they experience new parts of life. Therefore, the experiences that a child has during the first few years of life, either positive or negative, can really shape how their brain develops. These influences can affect how a child learns through school, life, how they problem solve, and how they communicate. Even though most of your childhood experiences influence your brain, the everyday activities that you undergo as an adult can also influence your neural connections and the skills that you're able to have. In summary, your brain is constantly changing and it constantly adapts to how you treat it. Alright, now that you learned how cool the brain is, let's see how much you remember. If you can, take out a piece of paper and match the number of the brain structure with its location on the diagram. Pause the video until you finish and unpause whenever you want to check your answers. Let's see how many you got. Feel free to go back and do it again for more practice. Now let's review the functions of each brain structure. Like the first exercise, take out a piece of paper and match the number of the structure with the letter of the function. Pause the video until you're done. Here are the correct answers. Feel free to go back and do it again for more practice. We hope that in this video you were able to learn just how cool the human brain is. Thanks so much for watching and we'll see you guys next time.